Imagine a house where the lights are always on, but the doors are always locked. Inside this house lived a person of immense potential. They were not a dreamer in the sense of someone who sleeps. They were a dreamer who stayed awake all night planning. If you walked through the hallways of this person's mind, you would see a magnificent gallery. There were canvases titled The Great Landscape, but they were stark white. There were notebooks labelled The Novel of the Century, but only the dedication page was written. There were hiking boots in the closet that had never touched dirt, and a guitar in the corner whose strings had never felt the bite of a fingertip. This person wasn't waiting for inspiration. Inspiration came every day, knocking loudly on the shutters. No, they were waiting for something far more dangerous. They were waiting for the perfect alignment. The checklist of the fearful. The person had a mental checklist that acted as a fortress. I will start my business, they would say, as soon as the market stabilizes. Then the market would stabilize, and they would say, I will start as soon as I have 20% more in savings. They reached that goal, and the checklist grew a new limb. I will start when I feel more rested, when the winter passes, when the kids are older, when the stars are in a better position. We often mistake this for prudence. We call it being responsible. But beneath the surface of every not yet lies a cold, shivering fear. It is the fear that if we actually start, we might discover that we aren't as talented as we hoped. As long as the project is in our heads, it is perfect. The moment we put it into the world, it becomes flawed. It becomes subject to gravity, to criticism, and to failure. So the person stayed in the house. They became a world-class expert on preparing. They bought the finest brushes. They attended seminars on how to begin. They watched videos of others succeeding and took notes on their mistakes. They were the most prepared person in the world for a life they weren't actually living. The passing of the seasons. Outside the window, the world moved in its messy, chaotic, uncoordinated dance. The person watched a neighbor across the street. This neighbor was impulsive. One day, the neighbor decided to learn the violin. For months, the sound coming from across the street was horrific, like a cat caught in a fence. The person in the house of blueprints would wince and close the window. How embarrassing, they thought, to be so bad at something in public. They should have waited until they took more theory lessons. But 2 years passed. Then 5. One summer evening, the person opened the window and heard a melody. It wasn't the sound of a master, but it was beautiful. It was confident. The neighbor hadn't waited for the right time to be good. They had accepted the wrong time to be bad. Meanwhile, the person's own hands had grown stiff. The ink in their pens had turned to dust. The perfect window of opportunity they had seen in their 20s had closed, and they were now looking for a different window in their 50s. But the habit of waiting had become a ghost that followed them into every room. The anatomy of the trap. Why is this trap so effective? Because it is built on the logic of the horizon. If you stand on a beach and look at the line where the ocean meets the sky, it looks like a destination. You think, if I just sail far enough, I will reach that line. But the horizon is an optical illusion. For every mile you sail, the horizon moves a mile away. The right time is exactly the same. It is a psychological horizon. You think that once X happens, I will be ready. But once X happens, your brain invent Y. When Y is solved, your anxiety discovers Z. You are chasing a ghost that is programmed to stay 10 steps ahead of you. The trap also relies on the sunk cost of waiting. The longer you wait, the more perfect the start has to be to justify the delay. If you wait 10 years to start a project, you feel an immense pressure that it must be a masterpiece immediately. This pressure creates a paralysis so thick that you cannot even pick up a pen. The Great Realization. One day, the person looked in the mirror. They didn't see a failure. They saw something much sadder, a spectator. They realized that life is not a rehearsal for a show that starts later. The rehearsal is the show. There is no grand opening night where everything is polished and the lights are perfect. There is only the dusty stage we are standing on right now. They realized that the right time is actually a graveyard. It is where the best ideas, the most beautiful songs, and the bravest businesses go to die. They don't die because they were bad. They die because they were never born. They were kept in the womb of someday until the mother grew too old to give birth. The person didn't hike a mountain that day. They only made it to the edge of the woods and back. They didn't write a masterpiece. They wrote 3 honest, clunky sentences. They didn't paint a gallery-worthy canvas. They splashed blue and yellow across a board just to see how the colours bled together. But when they returned to the house, the atmosphere had shifted. The blueprints on the walls no longer looked like plans. They looked like dusty relics. The person realized that a single muddy footprint on the rug was worth more than 1,000 clean floors. They looked at the novel of the century and saw it for what it was, an impossible burden. So they tore out the dedication page and wrote, "This will be a mess, and that is why it will be mine." The legacy of the imperfect. If you look at history, nothing great was ever created in the right time. Masterpieces were painted during plagues. Symphonies were composed by men who were losing their hearing. Revolutions were started by people who were hungry, tired, and outnumbered. If they had waited for the right time, we would live in a silent, colourless world. The most dangerous trap is thinking that you need to be at your best to begin. You don't. You only need to be present. The final call to action. Closing. As you sit here today, there is something you are putting off. You have a someday folder in your mind. You have a when things settle down excuse polished and ready. I am here to tell you, things will never settle down. The chaos of life is not an obstacle to your work. It is the canvas for your work. The wind will always blow. The bills will always come. Your body will always find a reason to feel tired. The trap is waiting for the storm to pass. The freedom is learning to dance while the lightning is still striking. So, walk out of your house of blueprints. Leave the right time behind.